North Korea to close its nuclear test site, and Kim Jong-un says the world can watch it being dismantled. Pyongyang wants to focus on economic growth after the historic summit with South Korea. A marked departure from hostile rhetoric. How will this play out, though, inside North Korea? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Laura Kyle. Leader Kim Jong-un has promised to shut down North Korea's nuclear test site next month. He reiterated the pledge during his summit with South Korea's President Moon Jae-in on Friday. But there's no word on the future of his ballistic missiles programme, nor whether he'll bow to demands from the US president to get rid of nuclear weapons altogether. Kathy Novak has this report from Seoul.
The world saw the smiles and handshakes on Friday. Now the South Korean president's office is revealing more of what was said behind closed doors at the historic summit. South Korea says Kim Jong-un promised to close the Punggye-ri nuclear test center next month and invited American and South Korean experts and journalists to inspect it. Days before the summit, North Korea announced it would shut down the site of all 6 nuclear bomb tests. Kim referred to speculation that test explosions had so badly damaged the site it couldn't have been used again anyway.
Chairman Kim said when they come, they will see that we have 2 bigger tunnels than the current test facilities, and they are in good condition.
The willingness to allow visitors to the test center appears to be another concession before the planned summit with Donald Trump and the North Koreans.
But this is necessary precondition for any kind of negotiations, because if they don't say that they want eventually to surrender their nuclear weapons, nobody is going to talk to them.
Moon phoned the U.S. president to brief him on the inter-Korean talks. The declaration signed there included a broad reference to denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. Trump and Moon agreed that more specific measures on getting rid of nuclear weapons should be discussed at the U.S. president's meeting with Kim. Kim Jong-un is also reported to have said, even though the United States is inherently hostile towards North Korea, once they talk with us, they will get to know that I am not the kind of person to launch nuclear weapons towards the South or target the United States across the Pacific. South Korea says Kim intends to eliminate another sign of division by changing Pyongyang's time zone by half an hour to realign with the South. North Korea set its clocks back 3 years ago, saying then that Japanese imperialists had imposed Tokyo time when Korea was an occupied colony. Moon also briefed Japan's prime minister and told Shinzo Abe that he'd conveyed Japan's willingness for talks with North Korea, a willingness Kim Jong-un said was mutual. Kathy Novak, Al Jazeera, Seoul.
Let's bring in our guests now, and joining us in Geneva, Tariq Rauf, former head of the Verification and Security Policy Coordination Office at the International Atomic Energy Agency. And in Seoul, via Skype, Peter Ward, a writer for NK News who researches the North Korean economy. Great to have you both with us. Thanks for joining Inside Story. Tariq, first of all, how much of a big deal is it that Kim Jong-un is shutting down this nuclear test site?
Well, I think this is to demonstrate now that he is serious in negotiating with the United States on North Korea's nuclear weapon program. And by earlier announcing the halt of ballistic missile tests and further nuclear weapon tests, and then adding to that the closure of the nuclear test site, is to basically show that he is serious and he's putting some chips on the table. OK,
so that's the why. But how significant is this test site in itself? I mean, some people say that it's been damaged anyway and can no longer be used. So is this a significant move on the part of the North Koreans?
Well, the Punggye-ri test site in North Korea has 2 portals. There's the south portal, which is the one apparently that has suffered damage or collapsed, according to Chinese news sources. But they also have a west portal. So even if the south portal were disabled, North Korea still has 1 portal or tunnel, which has subsidiary tunnels in which further nuclear tests could be carried out. But by announcing the closure of the test site, North Korea becomes only the second country that has ever exploded nuclear weapons after France to announce the closure of its nuclear weapon testing site.
Okay, does it have other testing sites in the country that we know of or that we suspect of?
We don't know of any other testing sites. Normally these would be picked up by satellite because one either needs to dig horizontal tunnels or vertical tunnels to carry out nuclear weapon tests, and these cannot easily be camouflaged.
Okay. Peter, Kim Jong-un has said that inspectors can come in, inspectors from South Korea, inspectors from the US, as well as journalists, to see the shutting down of the site for themselves. Are you surprised to see North Korea opening up like that?
Not especially. I mean, they have invited journalists and they've invited inspectors before, and they've definitely invited in journalists to view not only parades but also the demolition of the Yongbyon, the tower at the Yongbyon nuclear site. So, I mean, I think it was in 2007.
2000, yeah,
so,
9.
Yes. 2009. Yes, so I mean, they have invited in journalists before to witness them supposedly dismantle nuclear facilities. So, yeah.
Yeah, actually, it was between the two of us. It was 2008, I believe. I mean, it was still a decade ago, isn't it? It's a long time that no one has been in to look at these sites.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's because dialogue broke down and the North pursued rapid acceleration of its nuclear and missile program, especially over the last couple of years.
So why do you think at this particular point in time we're seeing these concessions being made?
I mean, there are a number of reasons why they could be making these concessions. I'm afraid I can't read Kim Jong-un's mind, and I don't have access to the corridors of power, so I can't be certain about any of these reasons. But one of them would probably be to get relief from sanctions. So there's been an unprecedented rise in the intensity of sanctions, with China actually implementing sanctions on the importation of oil into North Korea, the export of North Korean coal, North Korean textiles, North Korean labor. The Russians have stopped renewing visas for North Korean workers. I mean, so an unprecedented, near enough economic blockade. North Korean exports have fallen off a cliff, and the North Korean economy as yet does not show signs of really suffering, but that might be a reason. And look, they were emphasizing the economy in their propaganda right now. They're declaring victory in the nuclear component of their Pyongyang dual development line, and now they're saying they're going to focus all efforts on the economy. So that might be one reason. I think another reason might be the threat of war. The Trump administration and President Trump have said that all options are on the table, including military options. Rumors continue to swirl, or have until very recently swirled out of Washington, about the idea of a bloody nose strike, potentially, or the possibility of having to forcibly denuclearize the country through an attack on nuclear facilities. And that threat might be, probably is of great concern.
Tariq, two potential reasons for making concessions there. I have a big question. Do you think North Korea would ever actually fire a nuclear weapon?
Well, first of all, I'd like to state that even though inspectors were there before, these were from the IAEA, and they were only inspecting civilian facilities. So no international inspectors or personnel have ever seen or inspected any component of North Korea's nuclear weapon program other than Dr. Siegfried Hecker, who was shown their uranium enrichment plant and some plutonium some years ago. Secondly, if North Korea is to denuclearize, it needs to also bring in not only the International Atomic Energy Agency, but also the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization, which is the only international entity that has the credibility to verify the closure of the North Korean nuclear weapon test site. Just because American and South Korean diplomats or officials might visit the site is not sufficient for international credibility. With regard to your question about whether North Korea would ever fire a nuclear weapon, I seriously doubt that. I also seriously doubt that the United States would mount a preemptive attack on North Korea's nuclear facilities, because North Korea is holding Seoul hostage with conventional weapons, and there is no sure way of ensuring that North Korea's nuclear weapon capability could be wiped out in a preemptive attack, and millions or thousands, hundreds of thousands of South Koreans would be killed in a retaliatory non-nuclear attack.
Nevertheless, the nuclear deterrent card has really worked, hasn't it? Because it's brought Kim to the Chinese, the South Korean, and by the end of the month, the US tables.
Yes, so in that sense, Kim Jong-un has been very clever and successful by continuing ballistic missile tests and nuclear weapon tests despite crippling international sanctions. He announced after the last test in September, after he announced that a thermonuclear device had been tested, that the nuclear weapon development program was complete, and he made the similar announcement after the long-range missile test that potentially could reach the United States, that the missile program was complete. And then he proceeded to make these overtures to South Korea and to the United States to come to the table. And by offering to now officially to suspend missile tests and nuclear tests and to close the nuclear weapon test site, is basically to deal with the trust deficit that the United States, South Korea, and the international community has with regard to previous North Korean actions with respect to previous agreements that had been reached.
Peter, has Kim played a very clever diplomatic game here?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you see the way that he's sort of played the Chinese and the Americans up against each other. I mean, you could say that the Trump administration pursuing a trade war with China while trying to negotiate with North Korea is, well, maybe a bit of an own goal. I'm not sure. But I would say that, yes, Kim has emulated his father and his grandfather in playing an absolute diplomatic blinder. Yeah. I think just one further point on what I was saying earlier. I think that another reason they may have stopped nuclear and missile tests and come to the table is because they actually do think their program is at a sufficient level. They might be satisfied with the level of scientific, development, level of missile and nuclear developments as they are. So there are other domestic factors that may be weighing on Kim's mind.
Okay, and we will explore the issue of denuclearization just a little bit more in a moment. First of all, I just want to bring in some economic facts because it is widely believed that sanctions brought Kim Jong-un to the negotiating table. The scarcity of reliable data, however, means that information on the extent of North Korea's economic pain can be rather contradictory. Sanctions introduced by the UN Security Council since September have targeted North Korea's main exports, such as coal, iron ore and textiles. They've also cut the regime's imports of refined petroleum products by as much as 90%. But defectors and recent visitors say consumer prices and exchange rates have remained stable. And some analysts suggest the regime has adapted to international sanctions by adopting reforms that have made the economy more decentralized and productive. So, Peter, we mentioned before that Kim has expressed this desire now to focus on the North Korean economy. What do we know about how that economy is faring?
So the economy itself has done pretty well over the last 15 years, not 20 years. It's recovered from the shock of the collapse of the Soviet Union and the North Korean famine, in which hundreds of thousands of people died. And things started to turn the corner in the early 2000s. What happened was markets increasingly came to dominate in many sectors of the economy, be it in transport, in mining, even in foreign trade. Now, markets are legal, actual physical markets are legal, and there are almost 500 of them in the country. But at the same time, many market activities remain illegal. So the sale of certain products, the production of certain products inside state industry, the production of certain products is also illegal. And then many forms of private enterprise are illegal. So producing things inside your house is generally speaking legal. So farming your own private garden, or producing eggs, or sewing, sewing garments inside your house is absolutely fine. But the moment you start doing what a lot of North Korean entrepreneurs do, which is register cars with a state enterprise and start your own bus company or haulage firm, perhaps forging a partnership with a North Korean state-owned enterprise manager and producing garments, smuggling. There's a lot of smuggling in North Korea. A lot of these practices are still illegal. But under Kim Jong-un, there have been changes, and quite dramatic changes.
Okay.
So North Korea,
just hang for a moment there, because the audio is coming and going, and I'm just going to use the opportunity just to go and bring Tariq back in. Listening to this, I mean, it sounds like the economy is surviving and it's adapting and it's making ways to be self-sufficient. So is that the general belief that sanctions are working or not?
Well, I agree with Peter that the economy has grown. If we look at the report by the World Bank on the DPRK, their economy grew a very small amount, of 1.5% or so despite sanctions. I personally know some people who very recently visited Pyongyang to speak with officials from the foreign ministry and other ministries. They are frequent visitors and they can see changes on the streets. More people are better dressed, people have more cell phones, there are more taxis, restaurants are full of North Koreans eating, and this is not just a show. So the economy is somehow surviving. Normally, a country that makes a decision to make a WMD program, a weapons of mass destruction program, they will tighten their belt to make available the resources that are needed, such as Pakistan, South Africa, India, in the past.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. I mean, how much money goes into a WMD program?
Well, one can do it very expensively and one can also do it reasonably cheaply, even though cheap is not cheap. It's still several tens of millions of dollars. But the North Koreans have only carried out 6 nuclear tests and maybe 40 or so in all ballistic missile tests. So one could probably put a number on that of 100 million or 150 million. Although no one can be exactly sure, this is an amount that North Korea can easily afford, and it's brought North Korea to a position now where the President of the United States, the strongest military power of the world, is preparing to meet with the North Korean leader face to face, and the North Koreans are portraying this as a meeting of equals.
Okay. So, Peter, if that money, whatever the figure is suddenly made available, it's presumably going to be injected into the North Korean economy, given that Kim Jong-un has said that he wants to focus on it. What changes do you think he actually wants to make?
So I think that Kim Jong-un basically wants to, there's a tension between economic liberalization and social control, a real tension. And if you look at the reforms that have been implemented up until now, at least the reforms I have been able to find, Kim Jong-un is so far interested in maintaining and expanding personal economic, allowing people to engage in market activities on a personal basis, out of their own houses, or investing their own money into existing state-owned enterprises. But he's also, under his rule at least, private enterprise remains illegal in certain forms of private.
Okay, so we're seeing potentially economic reforms there, as Peter says. Tariq, are we going to see any kind of reforms in the nuclear program?
Well, first of all, if we look at Kim Jong-un's New Year's speech, he went into great detail about economic reforms and the sectors where he wants to reform the economy and build it up. With regard to the nuclear program, again, it's the question of what does denuclearization mean? Does it mean only the complete irreversible dismantlement of North Korea's nuclear weapons, or does it also mean dismantlement of North Korea's nuclear power and civilian nuclear program? And on the other side, does it also include the removal of U.S. nuclear security guarantees and extended deterrence provided to South Korea and also to Japan? In my understanding, denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula should mean the removal of all nuclear weapons, whether these are North Korean nuclear weapons or nuclear guarantees provided by an external power such as the United States to South Korea. But South Korea will need civilian nuclear energy or nuclear power to power its development. And if you remember in the past, in 1994, there was the agreed framework between the United States and North Korea, under which it was going to dismantle its existing nuclear power reactors, and Korean Energy Development Organization would build 2 light water reactors of 1,000 megawatts each. But that deal eventually collapsed, and then North Korea left the Non-Proliferation Treaty in 2003. So now the demand of the international community is not only the dismantlement of North Korea's nuclear weapons, but also a return to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty as a non-nuclear weapon state, and the full implementation of international atomic energy safeguards on the civilian nuclear program. And I would recommend a joint team of nuclear weapon experts from China, Russia, and the United States that would oversee the accountability and dismantling of North Korean nuclear weapons, which is the only credible way. And then finally, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization to be brought in to verify the closure of the nuclear test site, and for the Executive Secretary of the CTBTO, Dr. Lassina Zerbo, to be consulted for technical inputs, and also to have a direct face-to-face meeting with Kim Jong-un.
But do you think Kim Jong-un's got any intention, any real intention for complete denuclearization?
Well, it's still early days, and I think the international community is becoming very impatient. We've just had a few hours of direct meeting between the South Korean and North Korean presidents. There was a lot of rhetoric flying around between Pyongyang and Washington, and then you have what's called the punditariat or the think tanks and experts in the Washington Beltway, all of whom are pontificating as to what needs to be done. So I think we need to be patient. This negotiation, if it starts, is going to take several months. It will have many technical elements. For example, it took the Russians and the Americans under President Obama nearly 2 years to negotiate the new strategic reductions treaty. It took nearly 12 years for the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action to be negotiated with Iran and the other countries. So I don't think we should be impatient or expect too much too soon. And I think in this, the media can also play a very responsible role by damping down unrealistic expectations or irrational exuberance, to put it in another way.
Okay. Peter, your thoughts? I saw you shaking your head when I asked that question. Do you think Kim Jong-un is about to give up his nuclear weapons?
I mean, you can look at their media as a reasonably reliable signaling mechanism. And so far, there was one reference to new nuclearization in the newspaper yesterday after the summit. They printed the Panmunjom Declaration in full, and there was only one reference I could find in 6 pages of their official newspaper. So I don't see any serious commitments to denuclearization on the terms that the Trump and Moon administrations, or even that Xi Jinping, Chinese President Xi Jinping, would like to see. I see similar rhetoric to what we saw in the late 1980s, in the 1990s, in the 2000s, which is that they want to have denuclearization on all sides. They would like the United States to denuclearize as well.
Okay, Peter, we're losing you again. I'm going to have to just leave it there and go back to Tariq. Tariq, what do you think will be the best outcome of these talks on the Korean Peninsula and obviously the upcoming talks with US President Donald Trump?
I think the best outcome would be for the North Korean leader and President Trump to reach a political overall framework for the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, and then the technical and legal experts can get to work over the coming months to draft an agreement that both sides can sign. And in the meantime, there can be confidence-building measures such as the visit by the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization to the nuclear weapon testing site, inspectors from the IAEA to go to the non-military part of the North Korean nuclear program, and as I mentioned, a nuclear weapon experts team composed of Chinese, Russian, and American experts engaging with North Korean nuclear weaponeers to define the next steps. And eventually, once the warheads are dismantled, it's the nuclear material that is critical that would need to be sequestered and placed under IAEA seal so that that material can never be reused for nuclear weapons. Absent nuclear material, one cannot reconstitute a nuclear warhead.
Peter, just in the last minute that we have, we're talking about big changes here. How is the North Korean elite going to sell these changes to the people?
I don't think that we'll ever get that far down the road. We didn't last time, and I don't think we'll get that far down again. And if they were to deconstruct their nuclear program, they would leave themselves open to a foreign attack. And they don't want that. And they would like to avoid that at all costs. Indeed. So I don't think we're going to get that far.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, both of you, for joining us. We'll have to leave the discussion there. Of course, we'll keep closely watching developments there in North Korea. Many thanks to both of you, Tariq, Rauf and Peter Ward, for joining us on Inside Story. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, do go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Laura Kyle, and the whole team here, bye for now.